The sun was setting over the Montana plains when Tom Harrison first saw the woman standing at his gate. Dust swirled around her worn boots, and her thin dress barely protected her from the evening chill. She clutched a bundle to her chest, and even from a distance, Tom could see her trembling. He'd been a rancher for 30 years, weathered countless storms and droughts, but something about this stranger made his heart skip. "Help me," she called out, her voice cracking. "Please, I need your help." Tom dismounted his horse and approached slowly. The woman's face was streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes wild with desperation. The bundle she held moved, and Tom realized with a start that it was a baby, wrapped in a faded blue blanket. "What's happened?" Tom asked, keeping his voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. "They're after me," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder at the empty road. "They'll kill us both if they find us. I just need shelter. Just for tonight. Please." Tom had learned long ago not to get involved in other people's troubles. The ranch was his sanctuary, his refuge from the world's chaos. He'd built it from nothing after the war, poured every drop of sweat and blood into making it thrive. Getting mixed up with strangers, especially desperate ones, was asking for trouble. But then the baby whimpered, and the woman's knees buckled. Tom caught her before she hit the ground, feeling how light she was, how fragile. Her skin burned with fever. "All right," he heard himself say. "Come inside." He helped her into the ranch house, settling her into the worn leather chair by the fireplace. The woman clutched the baby tighter, her eyes darting to every window, every shadow. Tom lit the fire and put on water for coffee, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. "My name's Sarah," she said quietly. "Sarah Mitchell. This is my son, James. He's 4 months old." Tom nodded, studying her face in the firelight. She couldn't have been more than 25, but her eyes held a lifetime of sorrow. "Tom Harrison. This is my ranch. Been here alone since my wife passed, 3 years back." Sarah's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss. What are you running from?" Tom asked directly. He needed to know what he was getting into. Sarah's hands shook as she adjusted the baby's blanket. "My husband. James's father. He's not a good man, Mr. Harrison. He's involved with dangerous people. When I tried to leave, when I threatened to go to the law, he said he'd kill me. He said he'd take James and I'd never see him again. So I ran. I've been running for 3 days." Tom poured the coffee, his jaw tight. He'd seen plenty of cruel men in his life, men who used their fists instead of their words. His own father had been one of them. "Where were you headed?" "My sister's place in Oregon. But I don't have money for the train, and I can't walk much further. I'm sick, Mr. Harrison. I know it. Something's wrong inside me." Her voice broke. "I just need to rest. Just for a little while. 3 times a day, I need to feed James. 3 times a day, that's all I ask. Let us stay until I'm strong enough to move on." Tom watched the baby sleep peacefully in his mother's arms, oblivious to the danger that hunted them. Every instinct told him to send them away, to protect himself from whatever storm was coming. But he looked at Sarah's fevered face, at the trust in her eyes despite having every reason to trust no one. 3 times a day, he repeated. "You can stay." Sarah's relief was palpable. She whispered her thanks, tears streaming down her cheeks. Tom showed her to the spare bedroom, the one that had been meant for the children he and Margaret never had. As Sarah settled into the bed with James beside her, Tom stood in the doorway, wondering what he'd just agreed to. That first night, Tom barely slept. Every sound made him reach for the rifle beside his bed. But the night passed quietly, and when morning came, Sarah kept her word. 3 times that day, she fed her baby, speaking softly to him, singing lullabies that drifted through the house like ghosts of a happier life. Tom went about his work, mending fences and checking on the cattle, but his mind stayed with the woman and child in his house. He was being a fool, he told himself. Getting involved would only end in heartbreak or worse. But when he returned at sunset and saw Sarah standing on the porch, the baby in her arms as she watched the horizon with frightened eyes, Tom knew he couldn't turn them out. Not yet. The second day brought a deceptive peace to the Harrison ranch. Tom woke before dawn, as he always did, and found Sarah already awake in the kitchen. She'd made coffee, and the smell filled the house with unexpected warmth. Her fever had broken during the night, and though she still looked exhausted, there was color in her cheeks. "You didn't have to do this," Tom said, accepting the cup she offered. "You're giving us shelter. It's the least I can do." Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She was still watching the windows, still listening for sounds that didn't belong. Tom spent the morning teaching Sarah how to shoot. If trouble came, she needed to be ready. They went out behind the barn where the sound wouldn't carry far, and he showed her how to hold his old Winchester, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze rather than pull the trigger. "I've never shot a gun before," Sarah admitted, her hands shaking as she took aim at the tin cans Tom had lined up on the fence. "It's not hard. You just need to commit. Once you decide to pull that trigger, you follow through. No hesitation." Tom stood behind her, adjusting her stance. "Your life might depend on it. James's life might depend on it." Sarah fired. The recoil startled her, and she missed the can by a foot. But she didn't give up. She reloaded and tried again. And again. By the time the sun reached its peak, she'd hit 3 cans. Her shoulder would be bruised tomorrow, but she wore a look of grim determination that Tom recognized. It was the look of someone who'd decided to survive. They went back to the house, and Sarah fed James his midday meal while Tom prepared lunch. It felt strange, having someone else in the house, hearing another voice, watching the way Sarah hummed to her baby. The loneliness Tom had grown accustomed to suddenly felt heavy, like a coat he'd been wearing so long he'd forgotten its weight. "Tell me about your wife," Sarah said softly. "If you don't mind talking about her." Tom was quiet for a long moment. He'd spent 3 years not talking about Margaret, keeping her memory locked away where it couldn't hurt him. But something about Sarah's gentle voice made the words come easier. "Margaret was strong. Stronger than me in a lot of ways. She could birth a calf, ride all day, and still have energy to dance in the kitchen at night." Tom smiled at the memory. "She wanted children more than anything. We tried for years. But it never happened. The doctor said there was something wrong inside her, something that couldn't be fixed. It broke her heart." "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "She got sick 4 years ago. Started with a cough that wouldn't go away. By the end, she could barely breathe. I held her hand while she died, and the last thing she said was that she was sorry. Sorry she couldn't give me children. After everything, that's what she apologized for." Tom's voice cracked. "I'd have traded every acre of this ranch, every head of cattle, every dollar I had, just to have one more day with her." Sarah reached across the table and squeezed his hand. They sat like that for a while, two people who'd known loss, finding comfort in shared silence. That afternoon, Tom noticed the dust cloud on the horizon. It was still miles away, but it was coming closer. His stomach tightened. He grabbed the binoculars from the mantel and studied the approaching riders. 3 men on horseback, moving with purpose. "Sarah," Tom called, keeping his voice calm. "Come here." She appeared instantly, James in her arms, and when she saw Tom's face, she understood. "Is it him?" "I don't know. But we're not taking chances. Get in the cellar. There's food and water down there, enough for days if needed. Take the Winchester. If anyone besides me opens that door, you shoot first and ask questions later." Sarah's face went pale, but she nodded. Tom helped her down into the cellar beneath the kitchen floorboards, a space he'd built years ago to store root vegetables and preserve food. It was dark and cramped, but it was hidden. He handed her the rifle and a lantern. 3 times a day," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "That's what I promised." 3 times a day, Tom echoed. "I'll come get you when it's safe." He closed the cellar door and covered it with the heavy rug. Then he went outside to meet whoever was coming. His own rifle was loaded and ready, leaning against the porch railing where he could reach it quickly. Tom sat in his rocking chair and waited, his heart pounding but his face calm. The 3 riders materialized from the dust like demons from smoke. They were hard men, the kind Tom had known during his years as a cavalry scout. Men who'd seen too much violence and grown comfortable with it. The leader was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his eye to his jaw. He sat his horse with the confidence of someone who'd never met a problem he couldn't solve with intimidation or force. "Afternoon," Tom called out, his hand resting casually near his rifle. "Can I help you gentlemen?" The scarred man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We're looking for someone. A woman, traveling with a baby. You seen anyone like that pass through?" Tom's expression didn't change. "Can't say I have. Don't get many visitors out this way." The man studied Tom for a long moment, his eyes cold and calculating. "Mind if we look around? Just to be sure." "Actually, I do mind," Tom said evenly. "This is private property. You need to move along." The tension crackled like electricity before a storm. The scarred man's smile vanished. He shifted in his saddle, and his hand moved toward the gun at his hip. Tom's fingers wrapped around his rifle, not lifting it but making his intention clear. The two other riders spread out slightly, flanking their leader, their own weapons within easy reach. For several heartbeats, no one moved. The only sound was the wind whistling through the fence posts and the nervous stamping of horses sensing their riders' tension. "Now, friend," the scarred man said, his voice deceptively friendly, "we don't want any trouble. We're just trying to find what belongs to us. That woman stole something valuable, and we mean to get it back. Like I said, haven't seen anyone." Tom's voice was granite. He'd faced down Comanche warriors and Confederate soldiers. 3 thugs on horseback didn't frighten him, but they did concern him. These men had the look of killers, and killers didn't give up easily. The scarred man's jaw tightened. "The thing is, we've been tracking her for days. Trail led straight to your ranch. So either you're lying, or you're blind. Which is it?" Tom stood slowly, bringing his rifle with him. He didn't point it at anyone, just held it across his chest in a way that made his position clear. "I'm telling you the truth. Now you've got about 10 seconds to get off my land before I consider you trespassers, and I handle trespassers the way the law allows." One of the other men, younger with a patchy beard, laughed nervously. "Bill, maybe we should." "Shut up, Bill," the scarred man snapped. His eyes never left Tom. "You're making a mistake, old man. We're going to find her. Today, tomorrow, next week. And when we do, we'll remember everyone who helped her. We'll remember you." "I'll make sure to lose sleep over it," Tom replied flatly. Bill yanked his horse's reins, wheeling around. "Let's go. We'll check the other ranches." He paused, looking back at Tom. "But we'll be back this way. Count on it." Tom watched them ride away, not moving until they disappeared over the ridge. Even then, he waited another 10 minutes, scanning the horizon for any sign they'd doubled back. When he was satisfied, he went inside and opened the cellar door. Sarah emerged, clutching James and the rifle, her face streaked with tears. "I heard voices. I thought." "They're gone," Tom said gently, taking the rifle from her shaking hands. "For now." "You should have let them take me," Sarah sobbed. "You shouldn't risk yourself for strangers. That was Bill Crawford. My husband's enforcer. His killed men, Mr. Harrison. He won't stop." Tom guided her to a chair and poured her a glass of water. "Drink. Then tell me everything. The whole truth this time." Sarah took a shaky breath and began. Her husband, Robert Mitchell, wasn't just a cruel man. He was part of an organization that controlled half the territory, running illegal operations that the law either couldn't or wouldn't stop. Gambling, smuggling, worse things Sarah didn't want to name. Robert had married her when she was 17, fresh off a farm with nowhere else to go. He'd seemed charming at first, but the mask had slipped quickly. "When I got pregnant, I thought maybe it would change him," Sarah said quietly. "But it made things worse. He said James was proof of his legacy, that he owned both of us. When James was 2 months old, Robert brought home papers. He'd sold our son, Mr. Harrison. Sold him to a couple back east who couldn't have children of their own. He said he'd already spent the money, that the deal was done." Tom felt ice in his veins. He sold his own child. "I threatened to go to the marshal. That's when Robert beat me worse than he ever had before. He said if I told anyone, he'd make sure I disappeared and no one would ever find my body. But he made a mistake. He got drunk one night and passed out, and I ran. I took James and ran as fast and far as I could." Sarah's voice broke. "But Robert has eyes everywhere. He has men like Bill Crawford who do terrible things for money. I can't outrun them forever. I thought if I could just reach my sister, just get far enough away, maybe we'd have a chance." Tom was silent for a long time, processing everything. He thought about Margaret, about how desperately she'd wanted a child, about how she'd have given anything to hold a baby of her own. And here was a man who'd created a child and then sold it like cattle. The injustice of it burned in his chest. "You'll stay here," Tom said finally. "As long as you need. Mr. Harrison, you don't understand. They'll come back. They'll bring more men. They'll let them come." Tom's voice was hard as iron. "This is my land. I've defended it before, and I'll defend it again. Nobody takes a child from its mother under my roof." That evening, Tom prepared. He checked every rifle and pistol he owned, loaded them all, and placed them strategically around the house and barn. He rode out to visit his nearest neighbor, Jack Thornton, whose ranch was 5 miles east. Jack was a former Texas Ranger, a man Tom trusted with his life. Tom explained the situation, and Jack's weathered face grew grim. "You're asking for a war, Tom." "I know. But it's the right thing." Jack studied his old friend, then nodded slowly. "I'll send my sons over tomorrow. We'll take shifts watching your property. If Crawford comes back with men, we'll be ready." Tom returned to the ranch as darkness fell. Sarah had put James to bed and was sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. Tom sat across from her, and they talked late into the night. She told him about her childhood, about dreams she'd once had of becoming a teacher, about the small moments of joy she'd stolen during her marriage when Robert was away. Tom told her about his years as a scout, about building the ranch with Margaret, about the quiet emptiness that had filled his life since she'd died. "3 times a day, you feed your son," Tom said eventually. "And 3 times a day, you're reminding yourself why you're fighting. Why you're surviving. That little boy needs his mother, Sarah. And tomorrow, and every day after, we'll make sure he keeps her." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you doing this? You don't owe us anything." Tom thought about Margaret's last words, about the children they'd never had, about the second chance he was being given to protect something precious. "Maybe I need this as much as you do." That second night ended with an unspoken understanding between them. They were no longer stranger and host. They were allies in a fight that neither had chosen but both would see through to the end. The third day began with tension thick enough to taste. Tom woke to find Jack Thornton's 2 sons, David and Michael, already positioned around the property. David, the older one at 28, had taken the high ground near the barn with a good rifle and clear sightlines to the main road. Michael, 24 and quick-tempered, watched the eastern approach from behind a stack of hay bales. They were good men, both of them, raised right by their father. Sarah emerged from her room looking exhausted. James had been fussy during the night, perhaps sensing his mother's anxiety. She fed him his morning meal while Tom and the Thornton boys planned their defense. The house had good bones, thick walls built to withstand Montana winters and the occasional hostile visitor. The windows were narrow, easier to defend. The root cellar offered a last refuge if things went completely wrong. "They'll come today," Tom said with certainty. "Crawford doesn't strike me as a patient man." David nodded. "We spotted riders about 2 hours before dawn. 6 of them this time, circling around, checking the perimeter. They're planning something." "6, Michael muttered. "And there's 4 of us. Not great odds." "It's not about odds," Tom said firmly. "It's about determination. They're here for money, for a paycheck. We're here for something that matters. That makes all the difference." Sarah approached them, James sleeping in her arms. "I should leave. If I take a horse and head north while there's still time." "You wouldn't make it 10 miles, Tom interrupted gently. "They're watching the ranch, Sarah. The moment you ride out, they'd follow. At least here, we have cover, supplies, and help. Out there, you'd be alone." She knew he was right, but the guilt on her face was painful to see. "I've brought death to your door." "Death's been knocking on everyone's door since the world began," Tom replied. "Whether we open it or not, that's our choice." The morning stretched on, taut as a wire. Sarah fed James his midday meal while the men took turns eating and watching. The sun climbed higher, turning the Montana landscape into shimmering waves of heat. And then, just after 2 in the afternoon, they came. 8 riders this time, not 6. Bill Crawford led them, sitting tall in his saddle, confident in his numbers. But these weren't just his usual thugs. Tom recognized 2 of them from wanted posters he'd seen in town. Dangerous men with prices on their heads. Crawford had called in reinforcements, which meant he was either very serious or very desperate. Probably both. They stopped just beyond rifle range, a calculated move. Crawford cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Mitchell. Sarah Mitchell. We know you're in there. Send out the boy, and we'll leave peaceful. Nobody else has to get hurt." Tom stepped onto the porch, his rifle cradled in his arms. "She's not going anywhere, Crawford. And neither is her son." "This isn't your fight, Harrison." Crawford yelled back. "The woman's a thief. She stole property that belongs to Mr. Mitchell. We're just recovering what's rightfully his." "A child isn't property." Tom's voice carried across the distance like a gunshot. "And any man who thinks different isn't worth the dirt he's standing on." Crawford's face darkened. "You're making a fatal mistake, old man. Last chance. Send them out, or we'll come get them." "Come ahead," Tom called back. "We'll be waiting." For a moment, nothing happened. The 8 riders sat their horses, conferring among themselves. Tom could see the calculation in their body language. They had the numbers, but they'd have to cross open ground to reach the house, and some of them would die in the attempt. The question was whether Crawford could convince them that the payoff was worth the risk. The answer came when Crawford drew his pistol and fired a shot into the air. "Take the house," he roared. The riders charged. Dust exploded from beneath their horses' hooves as they thundered toward the ranch. Tom dropped behind the porch railing and sighted down his rifle. He exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The lead rider, a man with a red bandana, tumbled from his saddle. David's rifle cracked from the barn, and another man fell. Michael's shot went wide, but it forced two of the riders to veer off their approach. The air filled with gunfire. Bullets thudded into the house's wooden walls, shattered windows, kicked up dirt. Tom fired again and again, working the lever action smoothly, each shot deliberate. He didn't let himself think about the men he was shooting, only about Sarah and James huddled in the cellar, only about protecting what Margaret would have protected. Crawford's men reached the house. 3 of them dismounted and took cover behind the water trough in a wagon. They laid down suppressing fire while Crawford and 2 others tried to circle around back. Tom saw the maneuver and whistled sharply. Michael understood, abandoning his position to cover the rear approach. The battle raged for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Tom's shoulder ached from the rifle's recoil. His ears rang from the constant crack of gunfire. He reloaded twice, his fingers moving automatically through the familiar motions. One of Crawford's men rushed the porch, and Tom met him with his pistol, dropping him at point-blank range. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Tom blinked sweat from his eyes and realized the shooting had ceased. He peered over the railing and saw Crawford and 3 of his remaining men retreating, dragging a wounded comrade between them. 4 attackers lay still in the yard. The cost had been too high, and Crawford was cutting his losses. "This isn't over." Crawford screamed from a safe distance. "You hear me, Harrison? This isn't over." But they kept riding, and eventually, they disappeared. Tom stood on shaking legs and surveyed the damage. The house looked like it had been through a storm. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the battlefield that Tom's ranch had become. 4 bodies lay sprawled in the dirt, and the smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Tom checked on the Thornton boys first. David had taken a bullet through his upper arm, nothing fatal but it needed tending. Michael was unscathed but shaken, his hands trembling as he reloaded his rifle. None of them spoke. There weren't words yet for what they'd just survived. Tom opened the cellar door and called down softly. "Sarah. It's safe now." She emerged slowly, James clutched tight against her chest. The baby was crying, frightened by the noise and chaos. Sarah's face was streaked with tears, her eyes wide with horror as she took in the scene. "Oh God. Oh God, what have I done?" "You survived," Tom said firmly, taking her gently by the shoulders. "That's what you've done. You survived, and your son is safe." But even as he said it, Tom knew Crawford's parting words were true. This wasn't over. A man like Crawford didn't accept defeat. He'd regroup, bring more men, and come back with a vengeance. The ranch would never be safe as long as Sarah and James remained, and Sarah would never be safe as long as her husband wanted his son back. It was a trap with no obvious escape. Jack Thornton arrived an hour later, bringing the town doctor with him. Doc Stevens patched up David's arm and checked everyone else for injuries. He was a discreet man who knew when not to ask questions, but even he looked troubled by the carnage. After he left, Jack sat with Tom on the porch while Sarah rested inside. "You can't win this, Tom," Jack said quietly. "Crawford will bring 20 men next time. 30. However many it takes. And even if you fight them off again, then what? You're going to spend the rest of your life in a war. What else can I do?" Tom asked, exhaustion weighing down every word. "Send her back to her husband? Let him sell that baby to the highest bidder?" "No," Jack agreed. "But there might be another way. A legal way." Tom turned to look at his old friend. "I'm listening." Jack explained his plan. His brother-in-law was a federal marshal operating out of Denver, a man named Samuel Reed who'd made his reputation going after corrupt officials and organized crime. If they could get Sarah to Denver, if they could get her story to Marshal Reed, there might be a chance. Robert Mitchell's organization was big, but it wasn't invincible. With Sarah's testimony and a federal marshal willing to act, they might be able to bring the whole thing down. "It's a long shot," Jack admitted. "But it's better than waiting here for the next attack." Tom considered it. Denver was 300 miles away, a hard journey under the best circumstances and potentially deadly with Crawford hunting them. But Jack was right. Staying here was slow suicide. They needed to move, needed to act. That evening, Tom presented the plan to Sarah. She listened quietly, rocking James in her arms, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she was silent for a long time. "You've already risked so much," she finally said. "I can't ask you to do more." "You're not asking," Tom replied. "I'm offering." Sarah looked down at her son, at his innocent face, unaware of the danger surrounding him. "If we do this, if we go to Denver and it doesn't work, they'll kill us both. If we do nothing, they'll kill you both anyway," Tom said gently. "At least this way, there's hope." That third night, Tom made his decision. He would take Sarah and James to Denver personally. They'd leave before dawn, taking the mountain route where Crawford's men would be less likely to follow. Jack's sons would stay behind to protect the ranch and make it look like life was continuing normally, buying them time before Crawford realized they'd gone. Tom spent the hours before midnight preparing. He packed supplies for the journey: food, water, ammunition, blankets for the cold mountain nights. He loaded his wagon with everything they'd need and hitched up his two strongest horses. He wrote a will, leaving the ranch to Jack Thornton, just in case. He wasn't planning on dying, but a man should be prepared for all outcomes. Sarah fed James his final feeding of the day, the third time, as she'd done every day since arriving at the ranch. Tom watched her from the doorway, struck by her strength. She'd been running, terrified, half dead from fever just 3 days ago. Now she sat calmly nursing her child, preparing for a journey that might end in death, and there was steel in her spine. She was magnificent. 3 times a day, Tom said softly. "You've kept your word." Sarah looked up and smiled. "You've kept yours too. You promised shelter, and you've given us so much more." "It's not over yet," Tom warned. "The hard part's still ahead." "I know." Sarah's smile didn't fade. "But I'm not afraid anymore. Not with you beside us." They left in the darkness before dawn, just as planned. Tom drove the wagon while Sarah sat beside him, James bundled warm against the mountain chill. They traveled in silence, listening for sounds of pursuit that didn't come. The mountain path was narrow and treacherous, but Tom knew it well from his scouting days. It would take longer than the main road, but it was safer. 3 days into the journey, they spotted riders behind them. Crawford had been smarter than Tom hoped, posting watches on multiple routes. Tom pushed the horses harder, but the wagon was too slow, too heavy. The riders were gaining. "Take James," Tom said urgently, pulling the wagon to a stop in a narrow canyon. "There's a cave about half a mile up that ridge. Hide there until dark, then keep following the North Star. You'll reach Denver in 5 days if you walk steady." "What about you?" Sarah demanded, even as she gathered James into her arms. "I'll buy you time. Now go. Run." Sarah hesitated for only a heartbeat, then she kissed Tom's weathered cheek and ran. Tom watched until she disappeared into the rocks, then turned to face the approaching riders. He positioned the wagon to block the canyon path and took cover behind it, rifle ready. If this was where he made his stand, so be it. But what happened next, Tom Harrison could never have predicted. The riders stopped just out of rifle range, and instead of attacking, they raised a white flag. Confused, Tom waited. A single rider approached slowly, hands raised to show he was unarmed. It wasn't Bill Crawford. It was a woman, about 40, dressed in riding clothes and carrying herself with authority. She stopped 20 feet away and called out, "Mr. Harrison? My name is Catherine Bennett. I'm a Pinkerton detective, and I've been tracking Robert Mitchell for 6 months. We need to talk." Tom's mind reeled. "A Pinkerton? Here?" "Mitchell's organization is bigger than you know," Catherine continued. "But it's crumbling. 3 of his partners turned state's evidence last week. Federal marshals are moving in. But we need Sarah Mitchell's testimony to seal the case. Is she with you?" Tom made a decision that would change everything. He called Sarah back from her hiding place, and together they listened as Catherine explained. Robert Mitchell was finished. His empire was collapsing. But more than that, the couple who'd paid for James, who believed they were adopting legally, had come forward when they learned the truth. They provided crucial evidence and wanted nothing more than to see James return to his mother. "Your husband will spend the rest of his life in prison," Catherine said to Sarah. "You and your son are free." Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing with relief. Tom helped her up, and they completed the journey to Denver, but now with a Pinkerton escort. What Tom did next, though, would become the story that spread across the territory and eventually the nation. When they reached Denver, Tom stood before the federal court and testified not just about Crawford's attack, but about Sarah's courage and the injustice of a system that treated women and children as property. His simple, honest words moved the crowded courtroom to tears. Newspapers picked up the story. Within weeks, Tom Harrison became an unlikely hero, and his testimony helped inspire new laws protecting mothers' rights to their children. Robert Mitchell died in prison 2 months later, shivved by another inmate. Bill Crawford was hanged for murder. The organization crumbled completely. Tom returned to his ranch, expecting to resume his quiet, lonely life. But Sarah and James came with him. "Someone needs to help run this ranch," she said simply. "And James needs to learn from the man who saved his life." Tom and Sarah never married, but they became partners in every sense that mattered. She ran the household while he managed the land. They raised James together, and years later, when James was old enough to understand, they told him the whole story. How his mother had fought for him. How a rancher had risked everything for strangers. How 3 feedings a day had become the rhythm that held them together through the darkest time. 3 times a day, James said when he was older, she fed me. And 3 times a day, she reminded herself why she kept fighting. "That's right," Tom replied. "And on the 3rd night, when I had to choose between safety and what was right, I made a choice that gave us all a second chance at life." The story of the rancher who defied an empire for a woman and had child spread far and wide, inspiring others to stand up against injustice. Tom Harrison became a symbol of quiet courage, proof that one person could make a difference. And every day until Tom died at the age of 83, Sarah made sure his coffee was ready at dawn, her way of saying thank you for a gift that could never be repaid. James grew up strong and good, eventually becoming a lawyer who dedicated his life to protecting the rights of women and children. He married and had children of his own, and he told them the story of their grandmother's flight and their grandfather Tom's stand. The Harrison Ranch prospered for generations, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the bonds forged in the fire of shared struggle. And it all began with a desperate woman at a gate, a baby in her arms, and 3 simple words that changed everything: 3 times a day.